The biting, relentless winds that battered the outer walls of Lernazan city carried no warmth, only the metallic scent of impending frost and the unforgiving harshness of the mountain. The main gate of the capital was not designed to welcome. It was designed to intimidate, to crush the spirit of any approaching traveler long before they ever set foot inside. Massive blocks of dark, jagged stone, hewn from the deepest quarries of the earth, formed a towering archway that looked less like an entrance and more like the gaping maw of a colossal beast. The sheer verticality of the fortifications was dizzying. High above the groaning iron portcullis, the battlements bristled with lethal intent. Rows of Drea archers stood in perfect, terrifying stillness. They were perched like gargoyles against the grey sky, their hands resting gently on the taut strings of longbows. The vicious, barbed tips of their arrows pointed downward in a unified, deadly geometry. Down on the frozen earth, the ground defense was an impenetrable wall of coal-colored steel. 2 full companies of Drea honor guards formed an unyielding blockade across the main causeway. They stood in rigid, flawless formations, their heavy, spiked boots planted firmly into the frozen dirt. Not a single man twitched, not a single shield wavered. The silence of the Drea soldiers was far more unnerving than any war cry. It was the quiet confidence of born killers, waiting for the slightest excuse to paint the gravel with blood. They were waiting for the foreigners. Through the thick, rolling morning mist, the rhythmic, heavy crunch of reinforced wooden wheels and the steady clatter of hooves finally broke the silence. A convoy was approaching up the winding mountain pass. At the center of a heavily armed escort rolled a large, enclosed wagon, its dark timber polished to a high sheen and accented with jarring flashes of bright, polished gold. As the convoy drew closer, stopping just short of the Drea spear line, the sheer, alien nature of the Seram race became blindingly apparent. They were a severe, visual violation of the dreary, monochromatic world of Lernazan. The Seram, masters of the desert, were not human, nor were they akin to the Drea. Their skin was a profound, absolute pitch black, devoid of any natural shine or texture, completely absorbing the weak morning light. Their faces lacked the prominent angular features common to other races. Their nasal bridges were entirely flat, almost non-existent, giving their visages a smooth, terrifyingly blank appearance. But it was their eyes that commanded the deepest dread. Where pupils and irises should have been, thick, luminescent purple smoke continuously swirled and bled, leaking faintly from the corners of their eyes like a toxic vapor dissipating into the cold mountain air. The heavy doors of the central wagon swung open, and the Seram envoy stepped down onto the frost-bitten gravel. He was a walking contradiction to the bitter cold. He wore a brilliantly vibrant yellow robe of fine, woven silk, an arrogant display of wealth that snapped violently in the wind. Beneath the flowing yellow fabric, thick plates of solid, gleaming gold armor covered his chest and shoulders. He moved with a slow, hypnotic grace, his purple smoking eyes scanning the imposing Drea gate with a look of mild, calculated boredom. Surrounding him were his personal guards, a terrifying unit of heavy infantry. There were no frail spellcasters among them, only walls of muscle and steel. They wore specialized chainmail, a fluid, tightly woven mesh that offered maximum mobility without sacrificing defense, reinforced at the joints and vitals with heavy, ornate gold plating. Every guard carried a massive, brutally curved scimitar sheathed at their hip. Strapped tightly to their broad backs were unique, intricately woven metallic baskets. These deep quivers bristled with dozens of short, heavy throwing spears designed to shatter shields and pierce armor at mid-range. And resting menacingly at the waist of every single Seram soldier was a pair of long, wickedly sharp daggers. The envoy walked forward, flanked by his captain of the guard. The Drea Gate commander, a towering figure clad in spiked black steel, stepped out from the shield wall to meet them. The distance between the two factions shrank to a mere handful of paces. The cultural collision was palpable. The bright, opulent gold of Seram clashing against the dark, suffocating iron of Drea. "Halt!" the Drea commander barked, his voice grinding like two stones rubbing together. He did not bow. He did not offer a greeting. By the decree of the Silver Throne, no foreign steel enters the capital. Surrender your weapons to the checkpoint. All of them. The Seram captain, a hulking brute with a particularly dense plume of purple smoke bleeding from his eyes, stopped dead. He did not reach for his scimitar, but his large black hands rested heavily on the hilts of the twin daggers at his waist. "The scimitars and the spears, we will unbind," the Seram captain replied, his voice possessing a strange, resonant hum like a vibrating metal wire. "The daggers remain. They are bound to our flesh by oath." The Drea commander's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits behind his dark helm. High above, the collective creak of 50 bows being drawn back a single inch echoed down the stone walls. Down below, the front line of the Drea infantry subtly shifted their weight, their heavy shields locking together with a series of sharp, metallic clacks. "Impossible," the Drea commander stated, his tone completely devoid of negotiation. "You will strip yourselves to the cloth, or you will turn your wagon around and drive it back down the mountain. If you draw those blades to protest, we will not ask a second time." The tension spiked instantly, transforming the freezing air into a volatile powder keg. The Seram guards bristled, their hands tightening over their hilts, their purple eyes flaring brighter against their pitch-black skin. The Drea soldiers braced their spears, perfectly willing to slaughter the entire diplomatic convoy right there on the gravel. Before the first drop of blood could be spilled, the envoy raised a single, gold-gauntleted hand. He did not raise his voice, yet the smooth, melodic tone cut effortlessly through the heavy, aggressive breathing of the soldiers. "Captain," the envoy said softly, not even looking at his own guard. His smoking eyes remained fixed entirely on the towering dark gates of Lernazan. "Do not let pride cloud the objective. Adapt. This is how the Dark Kingdom operates. Unbind the steel. Drop the daggers. We have not traveled across the continent to wage a war in a doorway." The Seram captain hesitated for a fraction of a second, his jaw clenching, before offering a sharp, rigid nod. Slowly, deliberately, he unbuckled the heavy weapon belt, letting the scimitar, the daggers, and the heavy back basket fall to the dirt with a loud, clanking thud. One by one, the rest of the Seram guards followed suit, creating a small mountain of gold and steel at the Drea commander's feet. The crisis had been momentarily suffocated, but the hostility lingering in the air remained thick enough to choke on. Far removed from the freezing winds and the military standoff at the main gate, deep within the heavily fortified heart of the citadel, Chief Advisor Ilazar sat in the suffocating warmth of his private sanctum. Unlike the cold, unfeeling stone that made up the rest of Lernazan, Ilazar's study was a sanctuary of rich, dark wood and old paper. The walls were lined from floor to ceiling with massive, intricately carved cedar bookshelves. The air in the room was heavy, with the comforting, deeply intellectual sense of dried leather, melting beeswax candles, and the sharp tang of black iron gall ink. The shelves were a testament to decades of obsessive preservation. They held the heavy, dust-covered tomes detailing the brutal histories of Drea's ancient kings, bound in thick, dark hides. There were meticulously categorized ledgers containing military intelligence, detailed reports on the geography and weaknesses of enemy nations, and vast volumes of tax records. Tucked away on a highly protected middle shelf were the rarer, highly controversial texts, the written transcripts from the Council of Philosophers, an academic and intellectual movement that matriarch Luria had mysteriously championed during her younger, seemingly less violent years. Eleazar often stared at those philosophical texts, trying to reconcile the idealistic young woman who commissioned them with the terrifying, ruthless monarch who now wore the blinding silver crown. Eleazar sat behind a massive, impeccably organized mahogany desk. Everything had its perfect place. The silver inkwell was positioned exactly 2 inches from the edge of his thick parchment pad. The fine raven feather quills were arranged in a flawless row. Eleazar's own handwriting, currently flowing across the page, was a work of art, elegant, sharp, and highly legible, a visual representation of the order he desperately craved. But despite the warmth of the crackling fireplace and the absolute order of his desk, a cold bead of sweat trickled down the side of the old bureaucrat's face. His hand, usually so steady, gripped the quill a fraction too tightly. His mind was not on the history books, nor was it on the approaching foreign diplomats. His thoughts were entirely consumed by a much closer, far more insidious threat, the shadow clerks. Luria's parting words from the Great Hall still echoed in his mind like a death knell. "I will have my people watching you. You will never know who those watchers are." She had bypassed his entire intelligence network. She had seeded the administration with invisible spies, silent auditors who reported directly and exclusively to the Silver Throne. Eleazar, the man who prided himself on knowing every secret whispered in the citadel, was now flying entirely blind in his own domain. He did not know their faces. He did not know their names. It could be his assistant. It could be the captain of his guard. It could be the servant who poured his evening wine. Eleazar aggressively dipped his quill into the black ink and began to sketch a complex, sprawling diagram on the parchment. He was an architect of bureaucracy, and he was currently trying to design a trap. He drew overlapping circles of jurisdiction, fake information bottlenecks, and controlled leaks. If he fed a specific, fabricated piece of highly sensitive economic data to only 3 distinct departments, and that specific lie somehow made its way back to Luria's ears, he could isolate the leak. He could corner the invisible rat. He stared at the meticulous spiderweb diagram he had just drawn. The logic was sound. The trap was perfect. And it was completely suicidal. If Luria realized he was actively hunting her shadow clerks, she would not merely execute him. She would make an excruciating public spectacle of his demise. He remembered the blue blood dripping from the Great Hall's table. With a heavy, trembling sigh, Eleazar picked up the parchment. He carried it over to the roaring fireplace and tossed it directly into the flames. He stood in silence, watching the bright orange fire consume his perfect handwriting, turning his brilliant counterintelligence strategy into curling, black ash. He could not fight her, not yet. He had to survive the transition first. He had to adapt, just as the Seram envoy was doing at the gates. He returned to his desk, pulled a fresh blank sheet of parchment toward him, and dipped his quill once more. This time, he began to draft a genuine, highly efficient roadmap for the implementation of the new slave labor displacement laws. If he was to be watched, He would make sure the invisible eyes saw only the most loyal, hard-working servant in the kingdom. 3 sharp, rhythmic knocks on the heavy wooden door shattered his intense concentration. Eleazar did not flinch. He carefully placed the quill down, aligning it perfectly with the others, before speaking. "Enter." The heavy door creaked open, revealing the towering, imposing silhouette of a Drea honor guard. The soldier stepped just inside the threshold, his dark armor absorbing the warm candlelight of the study. He stood at rigid attention, his face hidden behind his dark visor. "Chief Advisor," the guard announced, his voice muffled by the thick steel. "A report from the main gate checkpoint. The diplomatic convoy from the Seram Empire has arrived. The initial security protocols caused a brief friction regarding their concealed weaponry, but the envoy complied. They have been fully disarmed and secured. They are currently being escorted to the lower guest wing." Eleazar absorbed the information, his face an impenetrable mask of calm, bureaucratic efficiency. The outside world was finally knocking on Drea's door, completely unaware of the monster that had just claimed the house. "Understood," Eleazar replied smoothly, picking up a small piece of cloth to wipe a microscopic smudge of ink from his fingers. "Ensure they are guarded heavily, but politely. Confine them to their quarters until further notice. You may go back to your post." The guard bowed stiffly. "Yes, my lord. Shall I send a runner to inform the matriarch?" "No," Eleazar said softly, his eyes drifting toward the flames in the hearth. "I will bring this news to the silver throne myself." The heavy mahogany door of the study clicked shut, sealing away the comforting scent of old parchment and beeswax. Out in the dimly lit, freezing corridor, Chief Advisor Eleazar stopped for a fraction of a second. He closed his eyes and drew a long, shuddering breath, letting the icy, damp air of the citadel fill his burning lungs. He had survived the morning, but the day was far from over. Adjusting his heavy velvet robes to hide the lingering tremor in his hands, he began his march toward the silver throne. The winding corridors of Lirnazan were usually bustling with the arrogant strides of the high bureaucracy, but today a graveyard chill hung over the stone pathways. The brutal execution in the great hall had cast a long, suffocating shadow. As Eleazar rounded a sharp corner, he nearly collided with one of the surviving ministers. The man looked horrific. His eyes darted nervously at every passing shadow, and he held a stack of ledgers so tightly against his chest that his knuckles were bone white. "Advisor Eleazar," the minister whispered frantically, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting a blade to materialize from the dark. "Is it true? The checkpoint runners say the Seram envoy has arrived. Do you truly believe this diplomatic meeting should happen now, after what just occurred?" Eleazar did not slow his pace. He could not afford to be seen loitering, not when the unseen shadow clerks could be anywhere. "It must happen, Minister. It absolutely must," Eleazar replied, his voice clipped and entirely devoid of comfort. "The matriarch already knew they were coming. She knows everything. If I turn them away at the gates, it will be my head resting on the chopping block next. Good day to you." Leaving the trembling man behind in the gloom, Eleazar reached the base of the grand spiral staircase. The ascent was agonizing. With every stone step, the air grew noticeably colder, thinner, carrying the distinct, metallic ozone scent that always surrounded the matriarch. When he finally reached the uppermost landing, the massive, imposing double doors of the throne room loomed before him. 2 towering honor guards stood like statues of black iron on either side, their heavy broadswords resting menacingly against their armored shoulders. They offered Ilazar a stiff, silent salute. One of the massive guards turned, raising a steel gauntleted fist, and knocked 3 times against the heavy door. The booming sound echoed down the stairwell. The guard pushed the door open just enough to slip his dark helmet inside. "Supreme Matriarch," the guard's muffled voice announced. "Chief Advisor Ilazar requests an audience." From the depths of the shadowy chamber, Luria's voice drifted out, smooth and chillingly indifferent. "Bring him in." The guard stepped back, pulling the door wide. Ilazar stepped over the threshold into the freezing, cavernous expanse of the throne room. He walked with measured, excruciatingly careful steps, stopping well before the dais. He maintained a deep, highly respectful distance from the silver throne, making sure not to cross the invisible boundary of her immediate domain. He bowed deeply, fixing his eyes on the cold stone floor. "Supreme Matriarch." Luria sat perfectly still in the high seat, her hands resting lightly on the armrests. The solid silver plate of her crown caught the dim, flickering light of the braziers, masking her face in terrifying anonymity. "What is it, Ilazar?" she asked, her tone suddenly sharpening, cutting through the vast room like a flying dagger. "There is no complication with the new code of laws, is there?" Her voice held the undeniable promise of violence. It was a test. "None at all, my lady." "Have no worry," Ilazar answered immediately, keeping his voice remarkably steady despite the sudden spike in his heart rate. "We are drafting every single mandate, word for word, exactly as you desire. The bureaucracy is moving swiftly." He paused, taking a calculated breath before delivering the weight of his visit. "The envoy convoy from the Saram Empire has successfully reached the capital. I am currently keeping them waiting in the lower guest wing." Luria tilted her silver-crowned head ever so slightly. "There is absolutely no need for them to wait, Ilazar," she said, her voice dropping into a dark, intrigued register. "I want to hear exactly what they have to say. Bring him in." "As you command, my lady." Ilazar offered another deep bow and retreated backward, refusing to turn his back on the throne until he reached the heavy doors. He knocked once from the inside. The honor guard immediately pulled the door open. Ilazar stepped halfway out, leaning toward the armored sentinel. "Escort the Saram envoy to this chamber immediately," he ordered in a harsh whisper. "However, ensure his personal guards remain firmly confined to the guest quarters. He comes before the matriarch alone." The guard nodded, the heavy iron door slamming shut once more, sealing Luria inside the vast, cold silence of her throne room. Left entirely alone in the dim chamber, Luria did not move a single muscle, yet her mind began to race with terrifying, predatory velocity. Behind the solid, unyielding barricade of the silver crown, she was fully aware of the monumental shift about to occur. This was not a domestic dispute. This was her very first diplomatic engagement as the supreme ruler of Drea. And it was not with an ally, but with the Saram, an ancient, bitter, and deeply unpredictable enemy race. She could already smell the heavy, unfamiliar scent of their arrival lingering on Ilazar's robes. She knew the Saram were beings of stark contrast, creatures of bright gold and thick purple smoke, fundamentally opposed to the dark, suffocating iron of her world. She had absolutely no intention of offering a warm welcome. She was meticulously planning a devastating show of force, not a physical display of swords and spilled blood. She had already utilized that tactic on her own ministers, but a crushing, psychological dominance. She wanted to strip the envoy of his diplomatic arrogance the moment he stepped into her freezing hall. Yet, Luria was a creature of profound calculation. She would not simply scream threats at the foreigner. She intended to ride the diplomatic currents, feeling out the rhythm of his words, letting him believe he was in control before she violently severed his footing. But there was a far more delicious, far more vital piece of intelligence she craved first. When this black-skinned, smoke-eyed envoy had departed from the Seram Empire, he had been carrying a message designed specifically for King Nirzal. He had prepared speeches, veiled threats, and calculated negotiations meant for a blunt, bloodthirsty warlord who understood only the crude language of swinging axes and brute force. Luria smiled, a thin, cruel curve of her lips in the darkness beneath the silver visor. She wanted to hear that original message. She wanted the envoy to deliver the exact words he had rehearsed for her dead father. She would listen to how the enemy perceived the old rotting regime of Drea. And then, once he had laid all his obsolete cards upon the table, she would reveal the terrifying, inescapable reality of the new matriarch. She would let the envoy realize, with creeping horror, that the simple beast they had prepared to negotiate with was dead, and a brilliant, merciless monster had taken its place. The massive door groaned inward, revealing the towering silhouette of the honor guard stationed outside. "Supreme Matriarch," the guard announced, his voice muffled and metallic behind his dark visor. "The envoy of the Seram Empire awaits an audience." Luria did not speak a single word. She merely raised her right hand, her pale fingers offering a subtle, fluid gesture of admittance. The guard nodded stiffly and stepped aside. The envoy of Seram crossed the threshold. The sheer visual impact of his arrival was like a bright, violent spark in a pitch-black cave. The throne room of Lunazan was a monument to shadows, cold iron, and dark stone. The envoy, however, was a walking testament to a desert sun the Drea rarely saw. The heavy, vibrant yellow silk of his outer robes flowed around him, whispering softly against the stone floor, while the thick plates of solid gold armor beneath gleamed with a defiant, arrogant luminescence. He walked with the slow, measured, and entirely unhurried stride of a man who had negotiated the fates of entire cities. He did not gawk at the towering vaulted ceilings, nor did he shrink away from the oppressive darkness. Instead, he took the room in with minute, calculated glances. His skin was a flawless, absolute black, completely devoid of texture or reflection. His face was unnervingly flat, lacking the sharp nasal ridge, but it was his eyes that drew the most attention. Where his pupils should have been, a hypnotic swirling vortex of purple smoke continuously bled into the freezing air, dissipating like toxic incense. Through those smoking eyes, the experienced diplomat quickly assessed the figure, seated upon the high throne. He had been preparing for weeks to face the hulking, battle-scarred mass of King Nirzal. Instead, he saw a slender woman, seemingly young in the grand span of their long-lived races. But the envoy was no fool. He did not mistake her physical stature for weakness. He felt the crushing, predatory aura radiating from her stillness. He calculated her posture, the terrifying anonymity of her silver visor, and the absolute silence of the room. He realized instantly that the rules of engagement had violently shifted. The envoy stopped a respectful distance from the dais. He did not drop to his knees. He did not bow in subjugation. He simply drew himself up to his full, impressive height and clasped his black hands neatly in front of his golden armor. He stood like a statue, the purple smoke curling from his eyes. He waited. In the grand traditions of high diplomacy, it was the right of the monarch to speak the first word. Luria let him wait. She used her heightened, crown-granted senses to listen to his heartbeat. It was maddeningly slow, steady. The man possessed a terrifying reservoir of patience. Spokesman of Saram. Luria's voice finally echoed through the hall, cold, resonant, and entirely unwelcoming. Welcome to the heart of Drea. Tell me, what does Saram, the empire that brought the great deserts to their knees, wish to say to me today? The envoy offered a smooth, shallow bow, an exact calculation of respect without submission. I greet the new master of Drea with the deep sincerity and profound respect of the East, my queen, the envoy said, his voice a rich, vibrating baritone that seemed to hum in the air. Your gracious compliments deeply please us. Beneath the silver crown, Luria's unseen eyes narrowed. She turned her face slowly toward Ilazar. Queen. It was an archaic, softer term, lacking the absolute religious and militaristic authority of matriarch. Ilazar immediately caught the dangerous shift in the air pressure. He stepped forward, his voice firm and corrective. You stand in the presence of the supreme ruler of Drea, Lord Envoy. You address Matriarch Luria. The envoy's response was instantaneous, so fast, so impossibly smooth, that Luria immediately realized the error had been a deliberate, surgical strike. He knew exactly what her title was. He had used the wrong word to test the ice, to see if the new ruler was easily provoked or bound by petty vanity. I beg you to forgive my profound confusion, matriarch, the envoy said, bowing his head slightly lower, his tone dripping with rehearsed contrition. When our convoy set out from the golden gates of our capital, your formidable father, Nerzal, was still drawing breath. I only learned of his tragic passing and of your sudden ascension while waiting in your guest quarters. I am deeply accustomed to the title of queen in our eastern dealings. I have committed a grave discourtesy. I beg your pardon. Spokesman of Saram, Luria cut in, her voice slicing through his elegant apology like a rusted blade. Whatever words you carried across the continent to say to my father, say them to me. Of course, matriarch, the envoy replied, seamlessly recovering his posture. My emperor, the great Shah Ravan, dispatched me upon this long road to offer your father a proposal of solidarity. You must appreciate that the realm is vastly crowded, and the ancient friction between the races is reaching a boiling point. They call Drea and Saram two eternal rivals. This is a historical truth. Yet my Shah Ravan prefers to view the current geopolitical landscape through a different, highly pragmatic lens. Luria leaned forward slightly. The silver crown gleamed. Fascinating. For what possible reason would Saram and Drea forge a solidarity? In response, the envoy reached into a thick, woven cloth satchel slung across his golden armor. He withdrew a heavy, tightly bound roll of thick vellum. With a swift, practiced motion of his wrist, he unrolled the parchment, walked 3 paces forward, and laid it flat upon the dark stone floor at the base of the dais. It was a vast, highly detailed physical map of the known realm, marked with shifting borders, mountain ranges, and deep red ink highlighting specific territories. From her elevated position, Luria could easily see the parchment, but she could not read it. The heavy silver plate sealed her eyes in darkness, though it left her pale jaw and lips entirely exposed to the freezing air. The crown held no magic of its own. By severing her sight, it merely forced her ancient, subterranean biology to take over, sharpening her natural intuition and hearing to a predatory edge. Yet, while this trait made her deadly in the dark, it effectively rendered her completely blind to ink and paper. A map was a visual language, and she was currently locked out of that world. For a fleeting second, the throne room held its breath. Then Luria reached up. She placed her pale hands on the sides of the silver crown. With a sharp, metallic clack, she unlatched the ancient mechanism. Slowly, she lifted the blinding metal from her face and set it heavily upon the armrest of her throne. The sudden exposure was stark. After the total darkness, the dim, flickering light of the braziers felt blinding. Her racial intuition instantly vanished, replaced by the mundane, limited scope of mere physical sight. The envoy finally saw the true face of the matriarch, pale, flawless, with eyes as cold and unforgiving as a frozen lake. She did not blink. She merely looked down from her high seat, studying the intricate lines of the map spread across her floor. "What exactly does this map point to, envoy?" Luria asked, her voice losing none of its commanding edge despite the loss of her crown. "The entire focus of this parchment is the Al-Salit Azaf border, matriarch," the envoy explained, pointing a black, gauntleted finger toward a sprawling, marked region. "My Shah knows intimately that there is no active hostility between the native Amaru tribes of the Al-Salit region and your kingdom of Drea. Similarly, Seram holds no quarrel with them. However, in the critical junction where the Al-Salit mainland bleeds into the harsh Azaf Desert, a coalition of highly savage, disconnected, and aggressively expansionist Amaru tribes has taken root." The envoy paused, letting his purple, smoking eyes meet Luria's cold gaze. "In the past, during the heavy reign of your great-grandfather, King Izalin, Drea maintained several heavily fortified garrisons in the Al-Salit region. But facing the endless, inexhaustible raids of these massive, feral Amaru populations, your great-grandfather was forced into a bitter retreat. He abandoned the territory. He let the historical sting hang in the air before delivering the core of his message. My Shah Ravan has watched these specific tribes multiply. They have grown stronger, more organized, and vastly more numerous. Our military intelligence projects that if their momentum is not broken, if they are not brought to heel, they will flood across the Azaf Desert. They will launch devastating, coordinated invasions along the Seram border toward Narvan and directly into the border city of Manazan, which falls under your sovereign rule. We know their intentions. We know their terrifying potential. Amaru, Luria whispered the name, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. She stared at the map. 4 long, heavy seconds ticked by. The only sound was the crackle of the braziers. She slowly raised her eyes from the parchment, locking onto the envoy. "If the Amaru cross the Azaf and raid your golden lands, is the great Seram Empire truly so helpless that it cannot respond to savages?" "On the contrary, Supreme Matriarch," the envoy replied, his voice maintaining its maddening, melodic calm. "The Amaru warriors do not strike in a straight line. They draw a circle. It is an ancient encirclement tactic. This means they will not merely isolate and devour the Seram city of Narvan. Their sweeping arc will inevitably consume the Drea outposts as well. Like a massive serpent, they will coil around the borders, tightening their grip until they suffocate the region. My Shah Ravan offers caution and solidarity, because if solidarity is rejected, it is Drea that may end up paying the heaviest price." As the last word echoed in the hall, Luria tilted her head slightly to the side. Her pale eyes narrowed into freezing daggers. She did not hear a diplomatic proposal. She heard the distinct, unmistakable hiss of extortion. "Envoy," Luria said, her voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper that seemed to lower the temperature of the entire room. "This is not an offer of solidarity. This is an imposition. It is a veiled threat." Suddenly, She slammed her open palm against the armrest of her throne. The sharp crack echoed like a spell shot. "What insolence is this?" Luria snarled, her fury finally breaking through her calculated icy exterior. "If Drea refuses to hold his hand, what exactly does your Shah Ravan intend to do? Will he step aside and let the Amaru wash over my borders? Ilazar, what kind of absolute disgrace is this?" Ilazar stepped forward instantly. His internal organs felt as though they had turned to ice, but decades of political survival kicked in. He maintained a flawless mask of cold professionalism, interposing himself slightly to draw the matriarch's wrath away from the foreign diplomat. "My lady," Ilazar said smoothly, his voice a calming, steady drone designed to de-escalate. "If it pleases you, allow the envoy to present the entirety of his burdensome message. Let him empty his satchel. If the taste of his words continues to displease you, the true ledger of debt will be billed directly to Shah Ravan, not to the messenger. The envoy is but a wretch, a mere vessel for his master's arrogance. Once he has exhausted his script, you, in your infinite wisdom, will render the perfect judgment." Luria did not look at her advisor. Her burning gaze remained fixed entirely on the black-skinned diplomat. "Explain yourself immediately, envoy," she commanded, her voice vibrating with suppressed violence. "Forgive me, Supreme Matriarch. It is certainly not my intention to offer any discourtesy," the envoy replied. Despite the sudden explosion of royal rage, the envoy remained rooted to his spot, his hands still neatly clasped. He relied on his vast experience to keep his heart rate steady. He had no desire to be insolent, but he was a sworn soldier of his Shah, bound by duty to deliver the harsh reality of the geopolitical map. "Shah Ravan harbors no desire to threaten the foundations of Drea," the diplomat explained, his resonant baritone voice maintaining its infuriatingly smooth cadence. "On the contrary, my master wishes to express that your kingdom stands under the very same shadow that currently looms over ours. This is a shared peril, a mutual bleeding of the borders. The Amaru tribes are swelling. They gather like a devastating avalanche of flesh and painted bone. If they surge toward our combined territories, and if we fail to draw first blood and mount a vanguard assault to scatter them, we will find ourselves desperately needing one another when the true slaughter begins. This is a crisis of the highest urgency, one that affords us no luxury of delay or pride. A partial alliance, a temporary linking of shields, can completely eradicate this menace before it takes root. If you deem it wise to accept this reality, it would be my profound honor to outline the Empire's strategic design for you." Luria's jaw set into a hard, rigid line. "Suppose I entertain this notion, envoy," Luria sneered, her tone laced with a venom that echoed harshly off the stone pillars. "What exactly is Saram's grand design?" Internally, a spark of grim satisfaction flared within the diplomat's chest. He had finally found the narrow opening he needed to deliver the core of his mission. "Upon the council of the Seram War Chamber," the envoy began, gesturing gracefully toward the red ink on the heavy vellum map unrolled across the floor. "Shah Ravan has decreed the formation of a massive defensive cordon. This military barricade will reinforce the eastern dunes of the Azaf Desert, heavily fortifying our great cities of Narvan and Sayin. However, because these feral Amaru tribes operate outside the boundaries of traditional warfare and favor a wide encircling maneuver, a tightening ring of blades, this cordon must be extended to hold any tactical value. To survive the encirclement, we must also reinforce your sovereign cities of Manazan and Sat." Luria's pale fingers tightened around the dark stone armrests of her throne, the friction producing a faint agonizing scrape. "You intend to march Seram's soldiers into my territory?" she demanded. It was phrased as a question, but her mind had already snapped the trap shut. The true, unspeakable insult had finally been laid bare upon the stones of her hall. "It is our deepest preference that you expand this defensive line using your own legions," the envoy replied smoothly, navigating the treacherous waters with practiced grace. "But when the Amaru vanguard inevitably strikes, Seram is more than willing to dispatch our forces across your borders. We offer this maneuver both to support Drea's defense and to intercept the initial raids before they fester into a full invasion. My Shah firmly believes that alliances forged in the fires of necessity carry immense weight." "Ilazar!" The command exploded from Luria's lips, a sonic crack of fury that made the flames in the wall braziers flicker wildly. "Throw this filth out. We will not sit in our own halls and endure such brazen profanity." The chief advisor, who had been holding his breath in terrified anticipation, immediately sprang into motion. He took 3 rapid steps toward the heavy oak doors, his velvet robes sweeping over the dark stone. But before his trembling hand could reach the iron handle of the door, the matriarch's voice halted him. Luria rose slowly from the silver throne. The imposing presence of her figure dominated the chamber, casting a long, terrifying shadow across the vellum map. She pointed a pale, accusing finger at the golden-armored diplomat. "You march into my sanctuary, bearing nothing but unfounded whispers and a pathetic scrap of stained parchment you dare call a map," Luria hissed, her voice vibrating with a lethal promise. "You attempt to sway the might of Drea with old ghost stories. Understand this, envoy. Drea is no longer the stagnant, predictable kingdom your Shah remembers. It has evolved. It will continue to mutate, to harden, and to multiply its strength. The sweeping reforms I am currently setting into motion will serve as a terrifying example to the entire realm." From the shadows flanking the dais, 2 towering honor guards stepped forward. Their heavy, spiked boots struck the floor in terrifying unison, the sound echoing like the beating of a mechanical heart. They closed the distance to the envoy, looming over him like twin monoliths of black iron. Their armored hands rested dangerously close to the leather-wrapped hilts of their broad swords. They did not draw their blades, but their suffocating proximity was a clear, unspoken promise of violence. "Drea is occupied, envoy," Luria continued, her tone dropping to a chilling whisper that carried effortlessly through the quiet hall. "Deliver these exact words to your master. Very soon, there will be threats prowling the borders far more devastating than a few scattered Amaru tribes. My reforms grant me this capability. They afford me this undeniable power. You might have been able to trick my late father into allowing foreign boots upon Drea's soil, but you will never deceive me. Get out of my sight." The envoy did not argue. He did not let a single ounce of humiliation show on his pitch-black face. With slow, deliberate dignity, he bowed his head, the purple smoke curling thickly around his golden collar. No hands were laid upon him. The honor guards simply pivoted, framing his exit, their silent, hulking forms escorting the golden-clad diplomat out of the throne room. The heavy doors slammed shut with a booming finality, sealing the cold chamber once more. Ilazar exhaled a long, ragged breath, turning back to face the dais. The tension in the room remained thick, a lingering, metallic static in the air. "My lady," the advisor began cautiously, weighing every syllable as if stepping on cracked ice. "Would you desire me to launch a formal inquiry into the movements of these Amaru tribes? Shall I consult General Manza regarding the reinforcement of our border garrisons. As vile and insulting as the envoy's proposal was, his warnings about the savages have given me pause." Luria sank back into the throne. She reached over, her fingers tracing the cold surface of the silver crown resting beside her, though she did not immediately place the heavy metal back over her eyes. "No," she replied, her voice entirely stripped of its previous rage, replaced by a cold, calculating calm that Ilazar found infinitely more terrifying. "Do not waste precious time or resources fortifying the dirt. We will breathe life into a forgotten diplomatic fragment." Ilazar frowned slightly, his mind racing through decades of carefully archived records. "A fragment, my lady?" "The great beast," Luria murmured, a sinister smile playing on her exposed lips. "The dragon Rakkanix, the colossal entity the Amaru worship as a living god. Long ago, that beast attempted to establish a dialogue with my father, a crude attempt at diplomacy that ultimately failed because Nirzal lacked the vision to entertain it. But my father is dead, and I am here." Luria leaned forward, her pale eyes locking onto Ilazar's weathered face. "I want you to leak this detail to Rakkanix, quietly. Let the whispers travel through the unseen channels. Perhaps the great dragon will want to test his fortune with the new master of Drea. If he harbors any intention of speaking with me, we effortlessly neutralize the entire Amaru threat without deploying a single soldier. The tribes are fanatical. They will blindly obey whatever command Rakkanix roars into the sky. It is a highly useful devotion." Ilazar's eyes widened slightly as the brilliance of the strategy clicked into place. It was a massive gamble, playing politics with a mythical apex predator, but the logic was unassailable. "A brilliantly cunning maneuver, matriarch," Ilazar breathed, bowing deeply. "I will execute it exactly as you desire." "Rakkanix is a colossal dreamer, Ilazar," Luria said, her tone dripping with dark, mocking amusement. "He is naive. His physical bulk may rival the mountains themselves, but his mind is burdened by foolish idealism. Plant the seed so skillfully that he believes the proposal to parley was his own idea. Now, withdraw.